Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Ancient Mysteries Unearthed. I'm your host, Chris Noble, and today we have a special guest, Jessica Taylor. Now, she's an intuitive channel. She's also an energy translator, a spiritual guide dedicated to helping humanity remember its multidimensional nature. We talk about the multidimensional nature of reality a lot on this podcast, so we're going to dive even deeper into that today with Jessica. Really excited about that. Now, through her profound connection with higher consciousness and other realms of reality, Jessica also brings through transmissions from these spaces, including beings from the Pleiadian star system, as well as other beings that we'll find out about today in the episode. I'm really excited for. And essentially, the information that comes through helps to illuminate humanity's awakening and energetic transformation that's reshaping our collective experience as we're all living and breathing right now. So her work explores the purpose of the human journey, revealing how by aligning with that deeper purpose, we can raise our vibration, embody our highest expression, and live from a state of greater joy, love, and abundance. These are all fantastic things that we're all about here on the show today. So we're going to dive right into it. Jessica, welcome to Ancient Mysteries on Earth. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for the wonderful introduction.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It's going to be really exciting. And, what I like to start every show off with essentially is, could you give us a little summary of your journey? And I say summary because I know our life path, especially, that brings us to places like your skills and your services, is obviously a very long story and a very amazing, complex one. But, for the episode today, I'd love to hear a little summary of how did you get, to where you are today? Was there an initial moment that kind of led you to your awakening and your ascension journey?
I was intuitive as a child, so there used to be a lot of phenomena, and I'd make habits and was very aware of elementals as well as part of that. And then really, that kind of went quiet throughout my teenage years because I suppressed it quite a bit because it felt like it was something that was so different to what everybody else was doing. And then sort of through my mid to late 20s, I really went through kind of trial by fire. I went through incredibly difficult personal time and through so much anxiety. But at the same time, I was hosting a psychic development circle. I wasn't the medium running the circle. I was just hosting the space. And this medium really taught me how to start to use my abilities and mediumship. And then from doing kind of that more, when I say conventional mediumship, I mean when we're speaking to spirits that have passed over, and a little bit of clearing work and energy healing and stuff like that. And then from then on, I went into a period of my life where everything kind of changed. My whole frequency changed. Because everything I was experiencing was different. I started to learn how to master my thought processes. And I'd really got a lot of fulfillment from doing work within the psychic realms. I started up a big meditation group, which actually became the platform for a lot of my own ability to connect into higher dimensions too. So the whole landscape completely changed and everything in my life had changed. All the things that I'd been wanting to manifest and going about it in ways that there was a lot of resistance suddenly all just came to pass. And from there, then I started connecting really with much higher frequency beings, and that's when the channeling started to come through.
All right. So that was really interesting, Jessica. Thanks so much for sharing that journey. And I know that I love to ask that question, just what was your journey like? Because obviously for everyone, it's so different and so unique. And I think it's also kind of a healing process in a way for people to hear everyone's awakening journey, because I think there's always
Yeah.
in it for everybody, right? And it can be very isolating. It can be very scary, freaky, and I think when people just get to hear more and more stories from people like yourself, and it's really healing and really helpful. What I was really fascinated about learning is, when you started to open up to these intuitive gifts of yours, when was one of the first times you had, let's say, another being come to you and have some kind of an interaction with you, and what kind of being was it?
So to begin with, it was just now he's just my regular spirit guide. So he's a being who is human, and he's had a human incarnation and experience. And that was the first kind of guide that I really met and started to work with. And I worked with him for quite a lot, and he was the one that used to bring through a lot of the information when I was working with people connecting to spirits that had passed over. And I found that as my vibration changed and as my work started to change, I started to connect with different guides. And that guide will still come in sometimes if someone has passed over and wants to pass on a message to someone that I'm with, but I don't work with him predominantly. So I'm always aware that he's there. I'm very grateful for that presence. But then as I started to, it really was the lifting in frequency, because it was like I was then able to make that connection with other beings, which I believe are in my soul team, who are in a higher vibration. So when I started channeling the Pleiadians, before I started direct voice channeling, for about 6 months, I had been seeing this being in meditation, and I knew that he was Pleiadian. He gave me information about it. He said his name was Kistos, and that's who I predominantly channel. And he was kind of letting me know that they wanted to use me to speak, that they were going to be asking me to bring through information for them. So initially we began by, he would give me messages whilst I was in meditation, and I would just remember them and then bring them through once I got out of meditation and talk about them. And then it was like, once I had kind of got adapted enough and was able to hold that frequency, then he dropped in and started to actually speak. And that's how we got the direct voice channeling.
Wow. I love that. Now, with your interactions with these Pleiadians, and for our viewers and listeners, just a reminder, Pleiadians, yes, are in pop culture kind of like a type of being that we channel, but it's a star cluster. So that means there's thousands, if not more, planets with probably, highly intelligent civilizations and whatnot. But there seems to be a lot of what we hear more and more every day, a lot of beings from this area, the Pleiades, and they're connecting with people on Earth. They're coming through people like yourself, Jessica, who are channeling them, and they're coming through in different ways as well. From your experience and maybe your opinion, what's this connection with the Pleiadians and humanity and planet Earth? From their perspective, have you gained any information as to like why are they interacting with us so much, and what's maybe their history with us, if you have any knowledge of that?
They've said that partly it's because the consciousness on this planet has, the human consciousness has risen to the point where they're able to transfer that information clearly. So there are more people who are able to hold that frequency so that they can actually channel it. But also that there is a lot of connection to Lemuria and Atlantis, and that they were a strong presence during that time. And that's why we get a lot of Lyrans as well, because there were a lot of Lyrans in Lemuria and a lot of Pleiades in Atlantis. And it's because we're kind of going through a karmic cycle that represents, or that is very similar to the times leading to the fall of Atlantis and Lemuria. It's almost like we're now being given an opportunity to go through this ascension of consciousness and reach that higher state, but let's hold it this time and not allow certain events to happen and make it fall. So they're here to kind of guide us through that process.
I love that. That's so fascinating, because we talk a lot on this channel about, the Yuga cycles, or as in ancient Greece, the great year that Plato refers to, which is that, I believe, 25,000 year roughly cycle, 25,000 year long cycle, which is where we get the age of the zodiac. We're now in the age of Aquarius, right? And this long form calendar of essentially what I've learned now is the rise and fall of human consciousness. Essentially, we go from that golden age, silver age, bronze age, etc. We've just exited, maybe back in 2012. There's debates on the age, of course, the year that happened, but roughly we just exited the lowest part of the sine wave, so to speak, which actually, for our viewers and listeners, correlates to the ebb and flow that our galaxy, or excuse me, our solar system takes through our galaxy, right? So there's scientific reasons as to why the ancients created this incredible cycle. And like you mentioned, Jessica, what likely that we've heard and that we've learned from that happened at the end of 12,000, halfway through that 25,000 year cycle, which is 12,500 years, which coincided here on planet Earth with the end of the last ice age, possibly most likely the fall of Atlantis. So, and for those, who are unfamiliar with Atlantis, that really is the high civilization that we likely fell from, right? So I can completely understand why they're at this stage, because we're at that end of that cycle, right? Where this is a very karmic time in our history. And I think that's why we're seeing chaos and all this craziness on the planet, because we're
Yeah,
moving through change, right?
Mhm. Yeah, they've talked about that too. I mean, one of the other aspects that they've said is a reason that they're able to communicate with us and give us more guidance now is because a lot of the way that they perceive things is non-linear. And in our human experience, obviously, we have a very linear perception of everything is constructed by time, by events that have happened previously, and then thinking about what's going to happen in the future. And because their perception is far less linear, and they feel that we're able to start to integrate the concept of non-linearity at soul level more easily now. So even if we find it a struggle to think about multiple dimensions and multiple existences all happening at once, when our brain tries to get around it, it's like we have this inner knowing that is starting to accept that information a little bit more easily. And they've also talked about the chaos and the experiences that we're having collectively at the moment as basically a huge amount of collective shadow work. So in order for us to be able to move up into this higher frequency, this idea of the third dimensional to fifth dimensional split, which I'm sure some of your viewers will be familiar with, is we need to allow the baggage to drop in order for the majority of us to be able to, or hopefully all of us to be able to move up into that fifth dimension of consciousness. And they've also directed that we will then be jumping sort of from fifth to seventh within a relatively short time. After that, it's taken maybe thousands of years for us to go from third to fifth, but it sounds from the perspective they've given me that it's going to be more like 500 to 1,000 years, possibly less, with the perception of it being less also, before we then make another jump into a much higher vibration again.
It's so true, right? What is, time? I think everyone as on this whole planet can probably relate to the fact that time just feels like it's speeding up right now on this
Yeah.
planet. And it also feels nonlinear, because when I look back at something that happened 3, 4, 5 months ago, it feels paradoxically super long ago, and it feels like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
Have you experienced that much? We're recording in 2025 for our audience right now. Have you felt much of that this year in general,
Yes.
Jessica? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's that strange paradox where it feels like both at once. And I think I wonder if that is just our consciousness starting to actually let go of the rigidity a little bit.
Well, this is why I opened the podcast up. Originally, I had it's called Ancient Mysteries Unearthed. It kind of implies that's about the past, right? But then I realized that the past doesn't really exist. So actually, when we talk about ancient Atlantis, it kind of relates to a lot of things, right now. And, with that in mind, I have a question for you, which is, what is your interpretation or definition of Atlantis and Lemuria? What were those civilizations in your mind, and maybe from the opinions of the Pleiadians that you've had contact with?
From what I've understood, they did exist predominantly at separate times, but that there was an overlap. That Lemuria was a civilization first, one much more driven by nature, and the beings that lived there were very much in harmony with that. And the Atlantis came slightly later, and again was still very much in resonance with Gaia, but had more of a technological focus on it. The kind of technology that they were using, I think, was still a lot more harmonized to the planet. They used a lot of crystal technology than what we see at the moment in our reality, but still that became more of a focus, and there became a situation there where beings from different star systems they started to learn that they were able to gain power through force and control rather than through working in resonance and working in flow state. And that was that would have been at that point where the yogic cycle was starting to shift anyway. And that seemed to really be a point where the landscape changed, and the drive for technology and the drive for resources that could bring power became a leading force, which ultimately led to the fall of that. And from my understanding, they wanted the resources that were in Lemuria, which is why that civilization essentially fell at the same time. And then we started to see a reconstruct of that later on the planet. But a lot of the connection to source was lost. So I believe that when Atlantis and Lemuria were at their kind of highest states of consciousness, and even as it was starting to dip comparatively to what we've experienced, most of us in our lifetimes, the connection to source was much stronger. So there was less of a separateness. And therefore, there was more awareness on how every single individual action to oneself and to the rest of the planet would create a resonance and create an effect that would affect everything else that was there and existing.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about the technological side of Atlantis, and of course, this is a big topic, and this is spanning thousands of years for our audience. And at the end of Atlantis, let's say 12,500 years ago, roughly speaking, they had a fall, some type of, I mean, maybe it was a natural disaster, maybe it was brought on by the Atlanteans, maybe there was a lot more complexity to the whole situation, which I'm going to probably go on that side of it because we constantly learn more and more about this time in our history. But from your perspective, what I've always been really fascinated about, and I always hear different versions and different opinions on this, which is, where did they go? Where did the Atlanteans go? Where did the Lemurians go? What happened to them? Are we them?
So this is, I get questions on this quite a lot, and often it comes into, do we have a bloodline that's connected to them also? And I kind of don't want to misquote them here because they get into so much depth and detail. But my understanding from them is that there are aspects of the physical experience continuing through different bodies and through bloodlines and through DNA, and there are also aspects of it where when we have strong connections with them, that doesn't just mean that we have a physical connection. It could mean that we have just a purely psychic connection. And again, the reason that so many people are having past life memories of Atlantis and Lemuria at the moment is because a lot of people are incarnating whose energy is strongly tied to beings in that reality. So if you take out the linearity and you see it as a circle, and that event is happening now, but just in a different dimension, there are just many that are having recollections or memories of that because it's actually happening now. And so they're able to tune into the frequency of that dimensional reality through what feels like memory, but it's actually like a shared lived experience. And they have also said that the Atlantean and Lemurian era went back about 75,000 years. That's not saying that's when the fall was, but that's when that civilization was at a high point, which is quite mind-boggling and difficult to kind of assimilate with the discoveries that we might have that are more earth-based. And they have also said that there have been tens of thousands of previous civilizations that have fallen, which does sound quite fantastic. But now we're starting to see things like that. A skull was unearthed that was about 1 million years old, a human skull, as in the same as our biology now, not from a different kind of line. So it opens up the possibility of, well, were there multiple other civilizations? And we've learned more and more each time that has come in.
Absolutely. I mean, these are the questions that we're typically asking all the time on this channel, right? And these are the questions that I've asked for my whole life, it feels like. And it's interesting because there really is a multidimensional nature to this question. There's the physical nature of our history and our lineage, so to speak. But then, of course, like you said, it's all happening at the same time. It really is like a circle rather than a linear line. And that's what we're coming to understand more as humans, is the non-linearity of time. So it really blows my mind when I'm in places like Egypt, as an example, and I'm staring at the Great Pyramid, is that I feel like I'm also back in ancient Atlantis, staring at the same structure. that's just in a more ruined form in this current time. Because I think structures like the Great Pyramid, from my perspective, are so ancient that they go well before the Great Flood and likely were from those times in our history. And like you mentioned, these artifacts, these skulls that are getting found,
Mhm.
Michael Cremo's work is pretty instrumental in that area with his Forbidden Archaeology book that's been out for decades now, where all he does is go back into paleontology and anthropology records that are all peer-reviewed science, and they're all talking from quite a while ago, like 100 or 50 years ago, but they all talk about bones that they find, that are undeniably dated to a million years or
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
So there's just so much going on here, right? This is a very busy planet. I noticed on your website, Jessica, that you had a photo of, I believe, like it looked like the Temple of Isis or something like that in Egypt. Have you been there before?
Unfortunately not.
No, I was just curious because there felt like some
No,
Egyptian
I,
energies going on there.
I'm so desperate to go. I've had so many recollections of times in Egypt, usually of the same experience, the same life. And they've told me that there's something hidden underneath a statue of Anubis in a temple in Saqqara. They've also told me about a crystal that was found, not found, that there is a crystal underneath the Sphinx. There's this mystery about something being underneath the paw of the Sphinx, and I channeled on that, and I went deep into it in meditation. They said it's a kind of crystal, but that if you tried to reach out and touch it, you wouldn't be able to touch it or use it. It's only going to be able to be used when humanity is in a high enough vibration to be able to use it. They didn't say what it does yet, but I know Sarah Breskman Cosme, she's also through her regression sessions spoken about a crystal that apparently is underneath the Great Pyramid at Giza as well, that has some kind of activation property. So I don't know whether there's two there or whether one of us has seen it in one place and one in the other. I think it's probably that there's two. There'll be another one somewhere, possibly under Anubis, maybe making a grid, but that these technologies are starting to become known to us. And by the time we actually are able to see them will be the time when we're able to use them. So it'll be very exciting, hopefully, to still be alive and find out what those things are.
That's so fascinating. When I was in Egypt in 2019, I was with Dr. Abhishek, and we had our private access to the Sphinx, and we got to see with Mohammed Ibrahim the secret entrance into the back left paw of the
Yes.
Sphinx. And so we on the channel, the footage should be on our YouTube channel here. If it's not, it'll get re-uploaded. I think there was an issue with it, but anyway, I filmed the whole thing. There's a little tunnel that kind of starts in that bottom left paw, and there's one that goes up the back of the Sphinx, and then one that goes somewhere into the ground, essentially. Seemed that it was quite well known about to the locals. There was garbage, unfortunately, all throughout the interior there. So people looked like they were just hanging out, which to me, Egypt's a fascinating place because a lot of this incredible stuff that you and I are talking about has likely been discovered by the authorities at some point,
Yeah.
and then they're just kind of sitting on it because it's so mind-blowing, I think, and it completely rewrites our history. It also
Yeah.
rewrites their history in Egypt as well, because we're going back before Egypt was ever Egypt, right? And so it's really, really interesting. And I was curious if you had any other insights from your beings that you've channeled or things like that with regards to these ancient sites. Could be Egypt or it could be elsewhere, where I'm convinced that these sites had a multi-dimensional nature to them, and they were some form of multidimensional technology that could, one, generate energy, but also two, enhance human consciousness and the consciousness and life force energy of all living things like plants, animals, etc. What's your perspective on maybe things like pyramids as an example? What were they? What are they?
Chris, before I answer, can you pause it? I'm so sorry.
Oh yeah, 100%. Go for it.
So they've shed a lot of insight about the pyramids. They have said that essentially they have multiple functions, and one of them was that they were able to generate huge amounts of energy and set it out over a wider area. So they had an idea that the civilization was starting to struggle, that the vibration was starting to dip, but if it plummeted too quickly, then that would cause much more catastrophic results for humanity than they knew that it was going to dip, and weren't necessarily trying to stop that from happening, but they didn't want us to just plummet and lose everything and lose all of our knowledge. So it was almost like they could transmit an energy which would send out a frequency which to some degree would actually store some of the knowledge in that energy and in that frequency. And also it would go out within the water underneath the pyramid, because water transfers consciousness. So all of the consciousness over the planet is held in our waters. So they were able to generate a high frequency and send it down through the water in order to help humanity to retain some of its understanding and some of its ability to make its connection back to source, particularly when it started to go through the darkest kind of times that then later followed. They explained that they were created through the weight to lift the stone was created through sound, and they had a totally different understanding and manipulation of sound. I mean, that comes in with some galactics being involved in the process of that and teaching that information. And they also explained that the frequency that the pyramid created a portal, and there are others as well. There's one under Antarctica, there's one under the Bermuda Triangle, and then there's a portal, although I'm not sure if there's a pyramid there, apparently, underneath an island called Esvedra in Ibiza, and that these places all kind of interlink and link up. And I mean, the one under Bermuda I had actually seen a long time before I started channeling about it. I saw it through a meditation that there was this pyramid there, and that was partly the field that created was why different craft have been lost there. And then they explain that these portals, so a lot at the fall of Atlantis and Lemuria, a lot of the beings went under the sea. A lot of the beings that were able to hold that vibration or able to adapt their body, because some were able to transform their body into a different physical form as well, went under the sea, and these portals became dimensions from where they would be able to move in and out. And this is actually something that I channeled on a podcast a couple of months back, and a couple of weeks after that channeling, there was a senator who came out and actually said that they were aware that there were interdimensional beings who were using certain places under the sea as portals to come in and out.
Wow. I love that, and it's sometimes amazing, sometimes the officials and these high-ranking individuals that will come out and just, talk, like lay out some of the most mind-blowing things. I think there was like the head of the Israeli Space Force or something like that came out and said like a year ago or something that there's absolutely a galactic, council or galactic alliance of beings, and then immediately after it was like, oops, and was I not supposed to say that yet, and it was really kind of hushed up quickly. Yeah, it was really funny. And I love when that happens, because of course, in my mind, I feel like our reality, even in 3D physical reality, is still so much more crazier than we are led to believe. And I feel like it's a hustling and bustling universe of life. It's just teeming with intelligent life too. And there must be so many beings having so many different forms of interactions with us, with the planet. And, from your perspective, do you think, because right now it seems that there's been, at least for the last 100 or 200 years, there's been a concerted effort, maybe longer than that, a concerted effort to keep these beings out of our awareness. Especially, let's say in the last 100 years, you could really see a very concerted effort for secrecy and not having disclosure around these things. But it seems so evident when you look into our history, the gods, as an example, in all these different cultures, these beings that are literally depicted like ETs even are in a lot of their graphics or hieroglyphics and things like that. So do you think that a long time ago, or not so long time ago, that we had a lot more interaction with these beings, multidimensional, extraterrestrial? Like, what was it like on planet Earth?
I think, I mean, that depends on how far we're going back in our kind of perceived timeline. I think when you're looking a short kind of time in the past, so like within 1,000 years, that those beings were here and around and making connections with us, but we just put a different label on it, essentially. So like even in more kind of recent years, quite often people have worked with angels, and a lot of the channelers, you know, in the kind of maybe previous couple of generations, when channeling was much seen as much more fringe and much less accepted, but they tended to channel angelic beings. And I've always felt that angelic beings could possibly be intergalactics, as well as different beings from different dimensions within the Earth realm. I actually asked about it, and the Pleiadian said to me, and what you perceive as being angelic beings are really, it's like a dimension of being human, but where the kind of only emotion and frequency really is love. So it's a very different version of the experience, and they are able to guide us because they come from a place that's much more based in love. But I think that various different entities that were perceived as both demonic and angelic, and beings that are said to have been descended from the gods, are very likely to have been out from different places in the galactic community that were using that because they would have understood that there were certain times in our consciousness where we wouldn't have been able to accept the idea of beings in other places and in other planets. So they'd seen our story, they'd seen our human story, and how much we have clung on to certain narratives. And that when we were in a place where there was a lot of darkness, where the kind of balance between light and dark was maybe even more polarized than it is now, they knew how to approach us. It's like trying to talk to a small child. Some people will try and talk to them exactly like they're another adult, and someone else will know how to kind of talk in their language and ease them into an idea and ease them into something. And I think that's why you also see different channelers now don't necessarily need to go into such a deep state of trance, because they're not trying to bypass a consciousness that has taught them that what they're doing is not real and is impossible.
It's so true. It's there's just so many ways to obviously bring these beings forth, and I think they know far better than we do what we're able to handle. You know, it's that also a bit of that prime directive idea that Star Trek gives us, which I think is a definite real thing, where these more advanced beings are very well aware, because at one point in their evolution, they were where we are, you know, in a way. I think there's like, you know, when we look at children, we go, oh, it's so cute. I remember when I was that age, right? And there's that level of like, we also can forgive them a little bit more, probably because of that, you know, their adolescence or their lack of adolescence. They're so young and still kind of immature, but in a cute, endearing way. And I know we're not always cute and endearing as humans. I'm fully well aware of that. But I also like to hold on to that as we are really just growing out of our kind of kindergarten phase, if you will, on a level of consciousness, because our technology is probably far more advanced than our level of consciousness is right now. And they just kind of need to catch up to balance each other out a bit more. You know, I just find that really, really interesting. And you look, we're talking about a lot of really interesting galactic things and these pretty big ideas, which I love, and I know our audience here loves this stuff too. But what I'm curious about, Jessica, is in this day and age where we're really starting to live in a more multidimensional reality, for those that are maybe a little newer to this journey of ascension, of awakening, of just becoming more aware of what our reality is, what have you found has really helped you in your path, and maybe your clients as well, where maybe it's some form of spiritual hygiene or perspectives that you've been able to take with you, that like everything we're talking about is fascinating, but as a human in our day-to-day lives, how can we connect with this idea and maybe bring it into our lives in a more tangible way? Like the fact that we're not alone in the universe, we're obviously far more multidimensional. What does that mean to the average human right now?
Well, firstly, I want to go back to what you said about it being like the kind of kindergarten, and that we're still learning in terms of consciousness. And in terms of consciousness, and yes, I think we are. I think we're learning to remember rather than learning from scratch. But one of the messages that the Pleiadians and other galactics bring through is that yes, you might be learning certain aspects of consciousness and sometimes compassion and empathy, but actually we have so much more to master in the human experience, that actually it's maybe more the graduation class. You know, it's not necessarily just for beginners, because of the consciousness aspect, we're trying to learn how to raise consciousness when we have an experience that is so heavily controlled by the need for security, by scarcity programming, by a physical body, by the density of that, by needing to have food, needing to have shelter. So, and also we have emotions. So we have our physical body that creates a hormonal response to various stimuli, which means that we then have an emotional response, and we're having to overcome that as well. So they are very, in some ways, yes, they're waiting to give us instruction in terms of consciousness, but they seem to be almost rather in awe of what it means to have a physical body. So for anybody that's having a difficult time in working out how to balance their spirituality and their physical body, that, you know, kind of keep going, keep working with it, because yes, you're not imagining it. It's really difficult. It becomes a lot to learn how to balance the two things. And what you see quite often when people go onto a spiritual journey, and I've seen people from hugely affluent backgrounds who then kind of drop everything and go into spiritual journeys, and they go off and they lose themselves in it because they become so kind of focused and honing in on the idea of their spiritual growth that they just forget everything in their material experience. But actually, we are here to have a material experience. That's part of the human experience. It's part of, like, the polarity, the light and the dark is how we expand ourselves. It's how we expand our energy, because those moments of joy are the things that always overcome the adversity. Our happy emotions have that much more expansion and creative power, because they are overcoming something from a lower emotion. So don't be afraid to feel the human experience, and to expect more, and to expect that as your vibration lifts, you will start to draw the things into your life that support that aspect of the journey. And if you find yourself gone completely to rags, and you've kind of shunned everything, then maybe that means that you need to bring in some more balance into your body, and reground, and actually start to experience from that perspective too, because the human experience has so much to offer. It's such a fully rounded opportunity when you learn how to work with all of it. And so for me, I had gone through such a state of deep anxiety. My lower energy centers were completely unbalanced. I was in poor physical health from stress. And so I got very kind of quickly lifted into the spiritual aspect of things. But I did learn then how to recenter and reground. And the way that I did that, I think, most was by connecting deeply with my heart center, because the heart center is an energy system. And I do that through meditation. Becomes like a portal to balance out the two aspects. So it brings through the consciousness from the higher realms, however you want to perceive it, and also allows grounding from earth to come up, and they can like meet in that place and almost kind of converse in that place. The heart sends more messages to the brain than the other way around. So the heart is phenomenally important and powerful, both energetically and physically, in ensuring good health, good physical health, and good spiritual health. So it's quite simple to drop into the heart space. You only got to kind of close your eyes and see its energy. A lot of people need a little bit of cleansing work, or need to maybe learn how to rebalance it, because if you've neglected it for years and years, it's going to be maybe not in the best kind of energetic state that it could be in. But it's not that difficult to do it, and once you kind of keep focusing on it and dropping into it, it becomes a thing that you become more aware of throughout your life most of the time. And what moving into the heart space does is it opens you up to authenticity. So if your throat center is out of balance, then moving into the heart space and dropping in with your eyes closed for a second and just seeing that space. And if there's something that you're unsure of, asking for guidance with your heart space open, and just allowing the feeling of what the right answer is to come into that space, will bring the rest of your energy body and your spirit into alignment. with your own authenticity, which then kind of affects your whole vibration and will align you with other like passages of truth, passages that feel authentic to you. And they will be the most high vibrational experiences, and bring in that balance and give you the kind of protection and expansion that you need to connect with higher frequencies and higher vibrations and do so safely. And I would also, just off the back of that, say, you know, people sometimes worry about connecting with spirit, like whether they're going to open themselves up to something in a lower vibration or cause themselves harm in some way. If you're in a very low state of vibration and you just try and open up and connect, then yes, you might find anything floods in. When you work from the heart center and you make sure that that feels aligned before you do any work, you begin to lift your vibration. And the more you continue to do that, the more that you start to notice the synchronicities, and you start to feel that joy and that gratitude as your life experience starts to change. Your vibration is rising, and that will stop anything that is low or harmful to you from being able to enter your energy field, because you cannot have something come and attach itself to you or come into your field and remain there if it's not in, at least in a ballpark of a resonant match.
So interesting, Jessica. You know, it makes me think of a lot of the ancient wisdom that we hear about from all types of cultures throughout time, honestly, all types of civilizations. You see it sometimes in the religious text, and it really comes down to, you know, if anything, this is something I've also really learned myself in more recent times is, you know, it's all about the authentic expression of your soul, really. And if you're just kind of, you're going to look at one thing you can really aim to strive for in this life, is to just try to be as much of yourself as humanly possible, because that's what you're here to do. And when you're talking earlier about, so what I interpreted as kind of the challenge of this life for our souls, it is not supposed to be easy. You know, this isn't an easy game we're here to play, but I truly believe it is a game. And if, you know, I look at games, I think about, you know, my favorite games that I'm really good at, I want to play them on the expert level, you know, so that I can really feel good about myself when I beat that game at the expert level, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like our souls are kind of doing something similar. That I've heard something like from Dolores Cannon and other people like that have spoken to this idea that the souls right now, especially right now on planet Earth, are, some of them are, not that there's hierarchy at all, I believe, but in a sense of, let's say, more advanced to less advanced souls and awareness and frequency, there's a very large amount of souls now incarnating onto planet Earth that are actually, I've heard terms like retired souls that have already ascended and done the whole thing, and that are coming back, you know, just because this is like a big, really important time. And as humans, we have amnesia, most of us, that can be remembered later in life, but a lot of us have that amnesia to this whole multidimensional nature, which again, I think is part of, to make the game harder for our souls. Let's forget that we're even these multidimensional beings for a moment and try to live out a life with that amnesia, just to add some more complexity to the situation here. After I've kind of just ranted about all that, like, do you feel similarly or have different views of, to almost like the gamification that this life is for our souls? Is it a game? Is it a place to learn? Like, what are we what are we doing here?
I think, I mean, so I see the setup as a little differently, because I don't see us as coming back in. My understanding of it is that it's one energy that disperses itself through multiple layers of frequency in multiple dimensions at multiple times, and we can connect with all of it. Like, you'll have an aspect of your soul that's in like the first dimension, and if you ever met that aspect, it would terrify you. But we don't tend to, because the frequency is so different that we don't make those communications. So typically we'll remember the other, like, past lives that our vibration at the time is able to assimilate, is able to bring in, which is why most people, when they start going through this process, will remember their human incarnations before they start connecting to their galactic ones. Although, like you said, there's a lot of souls coming in, seeming to have their energy come through now, where they are able to make that connection much more easily. They're much more aware of their divine spark, their connection to source. And I've noticed that with like young kids. I have 2 young children. I've seen that with them a little bit, and with other kids that that we kind of hang out with and stuff, and they seem to just have this knowing, like this awareness. And I did ask my guys about my son's previous incarnations. I won't go all through that, but they told me that with one of them, he's only had like maybe there's only one other kind of running experience as a human. The rest are all in higher frequency parts of the cosmos, which would kind of correlate with some of the things that he's come out with over time. And to me, my understanding is that the kind of nature of the game, if depending on how you want to look at it, is that through forgetting that we are connected to divinity, that we are this energy that has the ability to create everything, it gave us an opportunity to go through creating expansion of energy by essentially overcoming the challenges. So each emotion that we have sends out a frequency. Now, that doesn't happen in most other dimensions, because a lot of other entities have a different kind of physical form if they have one, and it's like lighter, it's less dense than ours. They don't have the same kind of running emotion that we do. And that the physical body, it produces these emotions as part of the opportunity to create different frequencies, which we then learn to overcome. And as we learn to create more high vibrational emotions for ourselves here in our experience, we then come into contact with that more through everyone that we meet. But that sends out like a pulse of energy back up to source, so back up to what is essentially us, but in our like wholeness, in our purest form. And that energy then expands. So they basically explained that the universe expands more and more. It's growing, it's learning more too. And when I say it, that is us. But we just forget that we are a part of that, and we are creating that through each emotion that we experience.
Wow. Yeah. And I just love how you break that down. It's it's a nice amount of things to kind of chew on there, because there's just so much to it. One thing that comes to mind immediately for me is the sort of law of singularity, or this law that I hear from people that have channeled or have had contact with ETs, that there is a common kind of perspective amongst them, that we come from the same source. We essentially live in a fractal universe, right? In a reality where we're just the same, sort of like an illusion of separation from this one spark, this one source of creation. And yeah, of course our universe is conscious and expanding and evolving, because we are, right? And if we are, it would make logical sense, if logic pertains to this whole conversation, that the universe would be also expanding and evolving and learning from all this infinite amount of unique experiences that all these beings are having, right? So it's a very complex situation, and at the same time, you can kind of distill it to these sort of simple things, that we're all one, essentially, and it kind of can help dissipate, I think, some of the division and craziness that we see on the planet right now. Is just to kind of have those higher perspectives of like, oh yeah, wait, why are we fighting? You're me, I'm you. I'm just fighting myself. Oops. Sorry, dude. I love this. So look, Jessica, this is fantastic conversation. As we kind of like near the end of our podcast here, look, we've got a situation here on planet Earth. 2025 is when we're recording this. A lot of people are waking up. There's a lot of tension, but a lot of bliss and joy. There's a lot of paradox going on in our planet currently. For the average person, for the person watching, this episode right now, that's just looking at all the craziness going on, what's your perspective on this, for lack of a better term, this collective awakening, this collective evolution that we're going through right now? What's your take on what's happening on the planet?
I think that it's something that has almost kind of been not preordained, because I don't believe time is set out in that kind of linear way, but we have been moving towards lifting into this state of higher consciousness for a long time, and we're getting that guidance. It's not a coincidence that people are awakening. Gaia is creating certain vibrations, certain resonances that we're picking up on, and we are seeing more people incarnated, or either newly incarnated, or also starting to realize later on in life their connection to that higher kind of thing, that higher frequency, and that they're able to tune into that. And I think we're also starting to become more aware collectively of how much our consciousness creates our reality, and that everything isn't necessarily just this presumed kind of pattern that we're given, that, you know, that we grow up, we're into a family, whatever family that is, that's going to dictate the future of our experience and the job that we have. And I think there are a lot of people that are starting to step away from that, and that's not even just because they're not necessarily having an aware spiritual awakening, but that's what it is, the frequencies that are coming through, and they're able to tune into this kind of knowing that actually there could be more for us to do and experience. And I know there's a lot of talk about the split between the 3D to the 5D, which is something that it certainly feels like it's coming. But the Pleiadians, they'd said before that they hoped that we would all move into 5th, but they saw that possibly there would be some that chose to stay in a 3rd dimensional experience, because they still maybe hadn't quite expanded their awareness enough. They hadn't chosen to do so, and hadn't chosen to move into the 5th dimension. But they've always said that, like, part of the reason that they come through and talk and communicate, not just to me but to others as well, is to try and to get everybody to move up and move through. Because when the whole collective moves up into that high frequency, that lifts the whole frequency of the universe. It doesn't just lift every individual person that's experiencing it, but even if some do kind of decide to stay behind for a little bit, because they want to experience reality in a different way, maybe they want to still experience the polarity more, because they still have aspects that they wish to learn, then it still wouldn't be far in our future before they too then made the jump, because kind of Earth school, like at level 3, is finished. We don't need to continue persisting with creating that reality. So we're not likely to see many new souls come in that don't choose to make that jump into 5th dimensional consciousness, or really 5th dimensional, 5th frequency. And it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, you know, how, whether we even notice the split, because this was another thing that the Pleiadians said, was that they're actually waiting to see. It's like the whole of the galactic community, this hasn't really happened before. There's been star systems where one planet has changed frequency to a different planet, and there have been different experiences, but not where one planet has split on, like, within that dimension. So they don't really kind of know exactly how it's going to play out. And that's why there is so much attention from the galactic community to help us, but also because there is intrigue. It's like, what's actually going to happen here? We've had a lot of suppression. We've had a lot of intense energies from other star systems and from the human experience that have kept us in low vibrations very deliberately for a very long time. And it's my understanding that there are other star systems where this lifting consciousness is happening there also. So our vibrations are actually kind of similar. So there are, like, consciousness uprisings, for want of a better term, not just going on Earth. They're in other places too, but it is on Earth where it's happening just on one planet. And they said they don't really know whether we will be aware of any split should it happen, or whether they seem to perceive that it's just going to be something that we will just smoothly kind of move through. Anyone that's moving into 5th will just smoothly move into 5th. and anyone that's in third is going to carry on pretty much as normal, but the experienced realities will be very different. But whether we are still physically in the same place is, I think, the unknown aspect to it.
Yeah, again, the multidimensional nature of this reality. It gets really interesting, doesn't it? It starts to play out, like more incredible than any science fiction film we've been primed with, and because it just pales in comparison to the reality we're living in. And apparently we're the Disney World of our galaxy, and it's a highly entertaining show, program Planet Earth or whatever. Like it's pretty wild.
Have you noticed how many like films and TV shows and stuff now, though, that really seem to be grasping this multidimensional aspect? That there was like touches of it in 80s sci-fi and things, but it's much stronger now. And some of the things have been quite profound. And I there's a few things that I've watched and I've been sitting there thinking, how do they know that? Like, I know that. How did they?
This is one of my favorite. Exactly, Jessica. It's one of my favorite things to do with pop culture is I don't mind consuming it to a degree, because films like the Marvel universe, right? Quantum Mania. This is the Ant-Man series that they do, and they literally just talk about quantum physics the entire time. They talk about the fractal nature of reality. If you watch what is it? Doctor Strange, the first Doctor Strange, literally breaks down the spiritual awakening, psychedelic awakening experience that we've all, like anyone in our situation, has had, and it does it visually in a way that I'm like, I couldn't have done it better. It's incredible. It shows you exactly what the journey's like, and there's just so many nuggets of this throughout our pop culture. Of course, Star Trek, Star Wars, things like that. So it all bleeds and weaves together in this tapestry of a fascinating reality that we're living right now.
I just want to add into that, like, because I have talked about how reality is a projection of our consciousness, and I mean I do watch like some of the kind of main like, I watch Stranger Things and that stuff like that, but I'm predominantly quite cautious about what I watch, because I think that if you're seeing a lot of a negative outcome of a reality, so something that is very, very fear-based, we like collectively we put energy into that, and we can start to create realities like that when completely unaware, because our subconscious doesn't differentiate between whether we're watching is on a screen and for entertainment or whether it's something that's really happening. So I think it's just always enjoy it, take part in it, notice the symbolism and notice like all the cool stuff that gets put in certain things, but do have that discernment as to whether it's affecting your energy. Like, how do you feel afterwards? Do you feel like you've kind of maybe been affected, or if your mood's dipped, then maybe stay away from that stuff, particularly if you're going through awakening and you're going through a lot of shadow work and some of this process is new to you. Sometimes when you're kind of learning the ropes.
100%. All right. So, Jessica, that's fascinating. All of this is fascinating. I've got a lot to think about today, and I know our viewers, listeners have got a lot to kind of chew on from this episode. Where can everyone get in contact with you if they want to work with you or just want to learn more about you? Where can they find out about all of the things that you do?
So you can find, you can book channelings, find out about my work at jessicataylorintuitive.net. And I also predominantly post on Instagram with any upcoming events, news of, like, I do group channelings and stuff as well, which you can get tickets for. That's the handle for that is at Jessica Taylor Intuitive.
Fantastic. So as always, everybody, all of Jessica's info will be in the show notes below. Check it all out there. And, from my audience and myself, Jessica, to you, thank you so much for being on the episode and spreading your wisdom, your beautiful energy, and just all the incredible information and love and frequencies that you shared with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me here.
My absolute pleasure. So everybody, what another fascinating episode of Ancient Mysteries Unearthed. As we have started to do now, we'll just do a couple of quick announcements at the end of the episode here. So as typically seems to keep coming up in our conversations here on this channel, Egypt, as always. Well, good news is we're going to be going there in September of 2026. Get your tickets below in the show notes. Now, if you're watching this a year or two later down the road and it's 2030 and aliens and everything has been disclosed and cars are flying now, and you're still watching this episode, we'll be doing sacred site tours for the rest of my life. So just check in the show notes below and you'll get the link to the next tour if you've already missed Egypt. But that's something that's really important, as we talked about on today. The frequencies and the energies and the information that you get from these places is mind-blowing, and there's just nothing quite like being there in person. So come on out with us, check it out. We'll be with Mohammed Ibrahim, myself, and Neil Gore from Portal to Ascension. As well, I know our viewers and listeners are really into sound and frequency healing. So I've just launched a therapeutic music library, which basically makes it really helpful for anyone that likes to use healing and therapeutic music in their practice to get copyright royalty-free music to be able to use in all their commercial projects. It's a really great place for healing frequencies and for people that work with those to get a really cost-effective solution for helping heal the world. And then a couple more things. Our partners, Portal to Ascension, they've got credible events starting next year. We've got the Mediterranean Cruise, which is going to be the mystery school at sea, essentially going around the Greek Isles, learning from all those incredible sites. Got to come on that. Details are going to be in the show notes as well. And lastly, the New Living Expo is basically the party of the year for all the spiritual and truth seekers to kind of come together and be able to see a lot of amazing speakers in one location in California. So check out all of that in the show notes below. I'm done for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning into this episode of Ancient Mysteries Unearthed. We will catch you in the next episode. Until next time.